In this video we're going to talk about perception, because at the end this is where every representative painter is going to work. If we paint a basket of fruit, we're not going to create a real basket full of fruit. We're just putting together on a support a bunch of colored stains that we're going to perceive as a basket of fruit. We're going to cover this subject because, first, it's going to help us during the representative analysis. Second, because as representative painters, it's going to help us later when we have to choose our subjects, and most of all, how we're going to represent them. Here, we will introduce some basic concepts on the human method of acquiring and processing what's around us. We're going to see the importance of our memories. We're going to introduce some basic concepts about image-brain processing. We're going to discuss how all this is going to help us during the representative analysis and when we choose our subjects and the way we're going to paint them. When we find ourselves in front of a scene, we're going to perceive it as three-dimensional, but this is not how we receive it. What we receive are two bidimensional images, one for each eye. Our brain is going to process them, and working on the differences, it's going to give us the perception of the three-dimensional space around us, so that we can evaluate distances and dimensions. But, as we have seen, our eye receives the image on the retina. And this is how it would appear if we could be able to see how that image is going to reach our retina. This is a bidimensional scene. This is why if we cover one eye and we look around, we lose the feeling of the three-dimensional. We can't measure distance and define the size of the object around us anymore. Once that image has been processed, together with many other information that our body is going to collect up, like for example the sound, the smell, and the touch, it will be stored somewhere in our brain, so that next time we will get in front of the same scene, we will somehow recognize it. Now, if on our support we can arrange some color stains that are going to reproduce on our retina the same image of the scene we saw, somehow we're going to trick our brain and get the perception of that scene, even if it's just a bunch of color stains. The way our brain is going to memorize the scenes we get in front of us, it's very complex. It can't memorize the whole scene, so it's going to take out just some information that, according with the other information we have in our memory, case by case it's going to choose, and it's going to memorize only them. So, when we will get in front of a similar scene, our brain will perceive all the details that it has stored, and we will recognize it. This will also happen if we will reproduce just a part of them. In this case, although we will recognize the scene, we will just perceive it as not realistic. For example, here we can see that this isn't an apple, but few lines that represent it. The way we memorize things is related with our experience. So, for example, when I moved to China, every face looked very similar to me. I wasn't able to process all the differences, because my brain was very well trained to see and analyze Western people, but not Chinese. Only after some time, I actually started to see and memorize the Chinese faces almost in the same way of the Westerns. And this is the reason why, painted by memory, if we don't know the subject really well, we're going to lose many details, and the painting that we're going to carry out is not going to be realistic at all. Of course, this is a choice that as artists we can actually do because we decide to paint in a certain way that it doesn't have to look realistic. So, no matter if we paint by memory or using a model, we have to decide how we are going to represent every single part of our scene. In few words, we have to do a representative analysis. The way we are going to represent our scene, it's going to define our painting style. And no matter if realistic or not, like for the handwriting, every painter has small differences that are gonna make his style unique. In this course, we're going to see only the realistic way, because at the end, if we can paint realistically a scene, probably with some training, we can also represent it in any other not realistic style. We're going to see an example now of the decisions that we have to make during the representative analysis using a model. As we said, in this analysis, we're going to break our scene in small parts, and we're going to decide piece by piece how, using the fundamentals, we're going to represent it on our support. At first, we're going to see two different types of models that we can use for our painting. To get our model, we have to set a real scene up in front of us. Now, we can keep it there while we are painting, or instead we can decide to shoot a picture of our scene and use it as a model. Using a real model is definitely more difficult because, first, in our analysis we have to turn a three-dimensional scene into a bidimensional image. In this case, we can help us by watching the scene with a single eye, so that at the end our brain is going to receive a bidimensional image, which is going to be easier for us to process. The second problem is that if we use natural light, these may change in the course of the day. It may change the direction, the intensity, or eventually both. And this, as we have seen, is going to change the distribution of the colors inside our scene, making our job very difficult. If we are doing a figurative painting, maybe our model gets tired and he decides to move, changing the scene in front of us. A photo, on the other side, it's much easier to analyze, because both eyes are going to receive the same image. The light is not going to change, and eventually our model is not going to move. Our representative analysis starts with a color definition. In few words, we have to choose what colors we are going to prepare on our palette. And for each part of our scene, we have to make a strategy on how we are going to get every single color. If, for example, using a single pigment, or if we're going to mix two of them, or eventually more. Once we know what colors we are going to use, we're going to continue our analysis. And one piece at a time, we're going to make a strategy on how, using the fundamentals, we're going to place and join our color stains on the support. For example, for this scene, our color definition is pretty simple. We're going to prepare on our palette some different grades of red, starting with a very dark crimson red, some red vermilion, or something similar. We're going to prepare one or two middle grades of red by mixing them in different quantities. We need some yellow. The lemon yellow, it's very nice color, but we have seen that it's a very transparent pigment, so if we mix it with other colors, we may not get the color we want. Maybe in this case, it's better if we prepare two different types. Here, we're going to use some lemon yellow and some Naples yellow. We're also going to mix them in different quantities with some red vermilion to carry out two different grades of orange. We're also going to prepare some zinc and titanium white. Normally on our palette, to make the colors darker, we want to prepare some bistro. But in this case instead, we're going to use the very dark crimson red, because with this light, all the shadows are red. Making a good color definition, it's very important to let our scene look realistic. So we have to start seeing things around us in a different way. We have to adjust our perception and see things that normally people don't see. For example, if we ask what's the color of this wooden board, the natural answer is brown, but this is not completely true. We also have a lot of orange and red inside of it. When we start painting our scene, we have to deal with the most difficult part of our analysis. Because also in this case, we have to see things that normally people are not trained to see. We have to learn how to recognize them in order to define our strategy and make them appear on our support. Because although normally people don't know what by the artistic point of view they should notice, it doesn't mean that they don't see it. So if we don't take care about everything, at the end our painting will be perceived as not realistic. For example, let's make a strategy on how we're gonna paint this candle. We can start by painting three areas: the bottom area with some red vermilion, the middle area with some orange, and we should paint the top area with some white. Since our white is pretty cold, while this on the other side is pretty warm, before we're gonna put a drop of Naples yellow, and we are gonna blend it with some zinc and titanium white. Now, we want to fade the red into the orange and the orange into the white. We also want to blend some crimson red here on the bottom and fade it. I don't know if you have noticed, but we have already decided what we're going to do and we haven't even started using our brush yet. So at the end, we're going to repeat it one more time because it's really important. Our job in the representative analysis is to define a strategy to make each part of our work look realistic using the fundamentals. Of course, this is just a theoretical plan that we're going to do every time before we start painting each part of our work. But based on our experience, things may go differently from what we have planned. So, once we start painting, we have to be ready to adjust our strategy if there is something that doesn't go exactly like we have planned. Normally, it's pretty easy to recognize small differences between two similar grades of the same color if they are joined by a sharp border or a short length fading. Things get more complicated when we have a long transition. In this case, the trick to find if there is a fading is to look alternating in two different positions with a certain distance between them, trying to remember as much as possible the color in each position. Normally, after a few times that we jump from one color to another, we start to see that there is a difference. And since we don't have any sharp border between them or short length fading, this means that we have a transition. And if we look carefully, we can also see where it starts and where it ends. We're going to continue our discussion on the representative analysis later when we are going to paint our first realistic scene. For now, let's go back to talk about perception. We have seen that according with our experience, our brain is trained to perceive certain things and is not trained to perceive others. For example, we have seen in this case that it's practically impossible to see if there is something wrong, and this for two reasons. First, because a person that watched this painting without following this course have no idea if it has been made according with a model. Second, because even if he knows that we have used a model, since this is an abstract painting, he doesn't have any memory of something real that can help him to feel that there is something wrong. But in this other picture, even if we haven't seen it before, we can see immediately that there is something that doesn't look realistic. And this because our brain is very well trained to recognize faces, and it can tell us immediately if the face belongs to someone we know or not. And I'm sure that we have seen this face many times. So, even without watching the original, we can feel that there is something wrong. But probably we can't say anything about this other painting because if we have never met the girl of this portrait, for us it looks exactly like a realistic person that we never met before. And this shows us that there are subjects which are much easier to paint in a realistic way than others, because our perception of what we consider realistic increases with the training we have to recognize those subjects and with the memories we have of them. Let's make a test now. Let's watch for 3 seconds this picture and then we cover it. Now, let's do the same thing with this other picture and then we also cover it. Can we say which one is the copy? I'm pretty sure that everybody can say that the second is the copy. What about the first one? Was that a copy? In this case, it wasn't so easy to say. Probably only few people have noticed that also the second is a copy. Actually, it's the same copy, we just overlap on it the face of the original Mona Lisa. And if we go to compare the two paintings, we can see immediately that they are really different in every part. But for the rest of the painting, without comparing it with the original, we weren't able to see all the differences. Now, if we go to compare all the details on the two faces, we can see that in the original here, we have a fading, and we have a fading also here in the copy. In the original, we have a shadow here on the nose, and we also have a shadow here in the copy. And if we go on comparing, we can see that this is also valid for the rest of the two faces. So what's the difference? The difference is in the shapes and the distribution of the fadings and the shadows. Now, let's go to compare the background. They are really different, not only in the shapes and the distribution of the fadings, but almost everything is different. So in the case of the face, our brain is able to pick very quickly that we have some differences, while in the case of the background, it wasn't. So this brings us to the last consideration. If we want our paintings to look realistic, in case of subjects that our brain is very well trained to recognize and on which we have memories, we have to be able to control all the details very well when we paint them. While in the case of subjects that our brain isn't able to recognize easily, we are allowed to make some changes. So my suggestion is, on the beginning of our artistic career, if we want to paint realistic scenes, it's better if we choose subjects that our brain isn't trained to recognize. In this way, even if we make small changes at the end, our painting is still going to look realistic. This doesn't mean that we can't paint faces. This looks like a face and everybody can see it. The only problem is that it doesn't look like the Mona Lisa's face. So if you want to paint figurative, we can do it, and a small change will not be a problem, unless we paint a specific person that can be easily recognized. In that case, it's better if we wait until we can control better what we do. With this last consideration, we have concluded our discussion on the perception. In the next video, we will talk about lights and shadows. If you enjoyed this video, we will really appreciate if you could click on like and subscribe to our channel. It will also help us very much if you could leave a comment. Thank you for watching this video and see you in the next one.